There is a question that has been asked in Sunday school classrooms, seminary halls, and comment sections for as long as people have read the first page of the Bible. It is not a complicated question. In fact, it is exactly the kind of question a child would ask. A boy raises his hand. The teacher smiles, and then he says it. If God made light on day one, where was the sun? The teacher pauses. The room gets quiet in a way it wasn't quiet before. And the boy, who is maybe 9 years old, has just done something that professional theologians have done for 2,000 years. He has put his finger on the oldest tension in the book of Genesis. Day 1, light. Day 4, the sun, the moon, the stars. 3 days pass between the creation of light and the creation of the thing we have always assumed makes light. And if you have read that passage and felt a flicker of confusion, a small, honest, wait, how does that work? You are in very good company. Augustine of Hippo, one of the greatest minds in the history of the Christian faith, sat with this exact question in the 4th century and wrote an entire book trying to work through it. He called it the hardest passage in all of Scripture to interpret, not Revelation, not Ezekiel, Genesis 1. So we are not going to skip past it. We are not going to explain it away with a quick phrase and move on. We're going to sit inside the question, because here is what I have come to believe and what I want to show you today. The gap between day 1 and day 4 is not a mistake. It is not a contradiction. It's not a primitive culture's confused attempt to describe the cosmos. It is a door. And on the other side of that door is one of the most important things the Bible ever says about the nature of God and about the identity of Jesus Christ. But before we walk through it, we need to feel the full weight of the problem. So let's go back to the beginning. The very beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That is how it starts. One sentence. No preamble, no mythology, no committee of gods debating in the heavens. Just a single subject, a single verb, and a universe. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Picture it. Not metaphorically, literally. Nothing. Not black space with stars in it. Not a dark room with furniture you cannot see. Formlessness. Void. The Hebrew word is tohu wabohu, chaos and emptiness layered on each other like two kinds of nothing pressing down. And then God speaks. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Day 1. Light exists. Now skip forward 3 days in your mind. Day 4. Same chapter, same creation sequence, and God says something that should stop you cold. Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. Lights, plural, the sun, the moon, the stars, mentioned almost as an afterthought. He made the stars also, as if the billions of burning nuclear furnaces scattered across 100 billion galaxies were something God added at the end of his notes. Day 1. Light. Day 4. The sources of light. You see the problem. If the sun doesn't exist until day 4, what is the light of day 1? What is making morning and evening on days 1, 2, and 3? What clock is running before the clock is built? Skeptics have pointed at this for centuries as evidence that Genesis is mythology. A beautiful story, perhaps, but not cosmology, not history, not something you are supposed to take seriously as a description of what actually happened. And I want to tell you something. I understand why they say that. Because on the surface, read quickly in translation, It does look like an inconsistency. But stay with me, because we have not looked at this closely yet. And when you look closely, when you look at the Hebrew, when you look at the ancient world this text was written into, when you look at the architecture of Genesis 1 as a whole, the apparent contradiction doesn't collapse under scrutiny. It opens. Let's start with the words. Because the English translation, te'wit, as good as it is, flattens something the Hebrew keeps distinct, and once you see the distinction, you cannot unsee it. On day 1, God says, Yehi, or let there be, or the Hebrew word, or spelled aleph, vav, resh, means light, pure light. Light as a phenomenon, light as a reality, light as something that simply is. It is one of the oldest and most elemental words in the Hebrew language. You find it in Psalms and Isaiah and Job. When the poet of Psalm 104 says that God wraps himself in light as with a garment, that is or. When Isaiah says, the people walking in darkness have seen a great light, that is or. It is light as presence, light as revelation, light as the first thing God calls good. Now go to day 4. God does not say Yehi or again. He says something different. He says Yehi maorot. Let there be maorot. The Hebrew word maor, plural maorot, does not mean light. It means light bearer, luminary, the thing that carries light, holds light, distributes light, a lamp, a torch, a vessel for something that already exists. These are two different words. One is the phenomenon, one is the instrument. On day 1, God creates the light itself. On day 4, God creates the objects he assigns to carry it, to govern it, to portion it out across the sky, to give it a schedule that human beings and animals and crops could live by. The sun is not the origin of light in Genesis. The sun is the appointed manager of light. There is a difference, and the Hebrew insists on it. Here's what most people miss. The same distinction appears in a word you may already know. The Hebrew word menorah, the 7-branched lampstand that stood in the tabernacle, comes from the same root as maor. The menorah was not a source of light. It was a bearer of light. It held the oil, it held the flame, but the light itself was something it served. The sun in Genesis 1 is a menorah in the sky. That is not a small idea. That is a staggering one. Because if the sun is a vessel, and if the sun is an instrument appointed to carry something, rather than generate something, then the light of day 1 is in a category the sun cannot reach. The light of day 1 is prior to the sun, independent of the sun. The sun does not explain it. The sun only manages it. And once you understand that, you are ready for the second Hebrew distinction, the one that changes the entire architecture of the text. In Genesis 1, 2 verbs describe God's creative activity. The first is bara, and it appears only 3 times in the entire chapter. Verse 1, God bara the heavens and the earth. Verse 21, God bara the great sea creatures. Verse 27, God bara human beings. Bara is the word for creation out of nothing. No raw material, no prior substance. God speaks, and something exists that did not exist in any form before. The second verb is asa, to make, to form, to appoint, to arrange. It appears far more often. God asa the expanse. God asa the 2 great lights. Look at day 4 again. God does not bara the sun and moon. He asa them. He appoints them. He sets them in place. He gives them a function here to govern the day, to govern the night, to mark seasons and days and years. The sun and moon are not created from nothing on day 4. They are assigned on day 4, given their roles, placed in their positions like officers being given their posts. What does that mean for the light of day one? It means, or that first raw elemental light is in the bara category, created from nothing, before the physical universe has its machinery running, before a single hydrogen atom is fusing inside a stellar core. Light exists because God said it should exist, and it is no other explanation. Pay attention to this. The ancient world that first received this text, the world of Egypt, of Babylon, of Canaan, worshipped the sun. They called him Ra. They called him Shamash. They built pyramids aligned to his rising. They organized their entire theology around the assumption that the sun was a god, possibly the highest god, the one who drove his chariot across the sky each morning and descended into the underworld each night. Genesis does not argue with that theology. It does something far more devastating. It doesn't even give the sun a name. Read day 4 again carefully. God makes the greater light and the lesser light, the sun, the moon. Not once does the text use the word Shemesh, the Hebrew name for the sun. Not once does it use Yeriach, the moon's name. Why? Because in the ancient world, to name something was to honor it. To give something its name in a creation text was to acknowledge its power, its divinity, its place in the cosmic order. Egyptian creation hymns are full of the names of gods. Genesis gives the sun a job title, not a name, not a throne, a function. Greater light, lesser light, assigned to govern, period. In one stroke, the author of Genesis demotes every solar deity in the ancient Near East, from god to instrument, from creator to creature. The sun does not make the light. The sun serves the light, and the light, that first light or day one, serves only God. Now here's where it gets remarkable, because the Hebrew word study gets us far. It tells us that light and light bearer are distinct. It tells us that the sun was appointed, not originated. It tells us that Genesis was written as a direct theological confrontation with every sun-worshipping culture in the ancient world. But there's still a question on the table. If the sun isn't the source of day one light, what is? Where does it come from? What sustains it across 3 full days before a single star is burning? A man in North Africa sat with that question 1,600 years ago. His name was Augustine. He had been a philosophy student, a Manichaean, a skeptic, and finally, after a long and restless road, a Christian, and then a bishop, and then one of the most precise theological minds the church has ever produced. He wrote a book called The Literal Meaning of Genesis. Not a metaphor, not an allegory, a literal interpretation, and in it, he arrived at this exact problem and refused to flinch. Augustine said the light of day one was not physical light. It was not the light of photons and wavelengths and electromagnetic radiation. It was, in his words, a light of a different kind, a primordial light. A light that existed as the first expression of God's creative act, before matter had its properties, before the sky had its color, before any object existed that could reflect or refract or cast a shadow. He could not fully define it. He was honest about that. But he was certain of one thing. The light of day one was not waiting for the sun. The sun was waiting for it. And Augustine was not alone in this reading. The rabbis of the Talmud, working centuries before Augustine in a completely separate tradition, looked at day one and said something strikingly similar. They called it the haganuz, the hidden light, the primordial light that was so intense, so pure, so unconstrained by the physical order that God eventually concealed it, reserved it, stored it away for the righteous in the age to come. 2 traditions. 1 conclusion. The light of day 1 is in a category of its own. But there's another way to see this, and it may be the most important one. It has to do with the structure of Genesis 1 as a whole. Not just the words, the architecture. Look at the 6 days as a unit and notice something. Days 1, 2, and 3 each establish a space. Day 1, light and darkness, the space of time, the rhythm of day and night. Day 2, sky and sea, the space above and the space below. Day 3, dry land and vegetation, and the space of the earth, the stage for living things. 3 spaces, 3 environments, 3 empty rooms, and a house being built. Then days 4, 5, and 6 each fill a space. Day 4 fills day 1. The sun, moon, and stars govern the rhythm of light and darkness. Day 5 fills day 2. Birds fill the sky, fish fill the sea. Day 6 fills day 3. Animals and then human beings fill the land. This is not accidental. This is architecture. This is a writer who knows exactly what he is doing. Building a structure in which every room gets a tenant, every space gets its inhabitants, every environment gets the creatures suited to govern it. And suddenly day 4 makes perfect sense. The sun and moon aren't created late because the author forgot about them in verse 3. They are introduced on day 4 because day 4 is when the spaces are filled. Day 1 established the rhythm of light and dark as an environment. Day 4 assigns the instruments that will manage that environment going forward. The sequence is not a scientific timeline. It is a theological poem with a deliberate, interlocking structure. And when you read it that way, the apparent contradiction dissolves, not because you explained it away, but because you understood the genre, the intent, the architecture of what you were reading. Hold that thought. Because the structure argument is powerful. The Hebrew argument is powerful. Augustine is powerful. But none of them are the deepest answer. The deepest answer is not about what the light of day 1 is. It is about where it goes. Because the light of day 1 does not disappear after Genesis 1. It reappears again and again and again in places and moments and faces you would not expect. It follows the story of God and his people like a thread woven into fabric you cannot always see, until suddenly the light catches it, and you realize the thread was there all along. There is a light in the story that has nothing to do with physics, and by the end of what I'm about to show you, you will know exactly what it is. Follow the light. That is all I'm asking you to do for the next few minutes. Set aside the creation debate. Set aside the cosmology. Just follow the light now and watch where it goes. We are now roughly 500 years after Genesis. The descendants of Abraham are slaves in Egypt. They have been slaves for 400 years. They build Pharaoh's cities with their hands and bury their sons in the Nile and pray to a God who, many of them have begun to fear, has forgotten them entirely. And then a man named Moses stands before a burning bush in the wilderness of Midian. Now you know about the burning bush. You have heard the story. But I want you to notice something about it that usually gets skipped. The bush burns, and it is not consumed. Fire requires fuel. That is not a theological statement. That is physics. A bush that burns without being consumed is a bush that is not being powered by the bush. The fire has another source. The light coming off that bush is not chemical combustion. It is something else. Moses takes off his sandals. He covers his face, and God speaks to him from inside that light. The same God who, on the first day of creation, looked at light and called it good. This is not the sun. This is not a luminary appointed to govern the day. This is the day one category of light. Showing up in a thorn bush in the wilderness, 5 centuries after Eden, because it never went anywhere. Then follow the light further. Moses leads the Israelites out of Egypt. 2 million people, men, women, children, livestock, crossing a desert at night with no road, no map, no way forward. And the text says something so matter-of-fact, it is easy to miss. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light. A pillar of fire. Not a torch, not a bonfire. A pillar. A column of fire stretching up into the desert sky, moving when they moved, stopping when they stopped, visible to 2 million people simultaneously, guiding them across terrain that would have swallowed them in darkness. No sun required, no moon required. God navigates his people through the wilderness with the same category of light he spoke into existence on day one. And here's the part nobody tells you. When Moses eventually builds the tabernacle, the portable sanctuary, the dwelling place of God among his people, there is a moment described in Exodus 40 that should stop you cold. Moses finishes the work. Every curtain hung, every piece of furniture in place, every detail of God's instructions carried out to the letter. And then, before a single lamp in the menorah is lit, before a single flame is touched to a single wick, the cloud covers the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord fills it. Light fills the tabernacle before the lampstand is kindled. God's presence, his day one light, arrives first. The menorah, the maor, the lamp bearer comes after. The instrument follows the light, not the other way around. The tabernacle is Genesis 1 in miniature, the same sequence, the same logic. Light first, luminaries second. Presence before instrument. God before the machinery. He uses to make himself visible to human eyes. Now follow the light one more time. We are in the 1st century. A man named Jesus has been walking the roads of Galilee for 3 years. He has healed the sick and calmed a storm and fed thousands with a boy's lunch. And one day he takes 3 of his disciples, a fisherman named Peter and 2 brothers named James and John, up a high mountain. And something happens on that mountain that the disciples will spend the rest of their lives trying to describe. Matthew says, his face shone like the sun. His clothes became white as light. Luke says the appearance of his face changed, and his clothing became as bright as a flash of lightning. And a voice came from a bright cloud, the same cloud that had covered the tabernacle, the same cloud that had led Israel through the wilderness, and said 3 words, "This is my son." Peter, James, and John fall on their faces. Now, what is the light coming off Jesus on that mountain? It is not the sun. The sun is still in the sky. It is not a lamp. It is not a torch or a lantern or a reflection. The light is coming from him, from inside him, through his face and his hands and the fabric of his robe. This is the haganuz, the hidden light the rabbis spoke of. This is Augustine's light of a different kind. This is the day one light that was never generated by a star, never measured by physics, never governed by a luminary assigned to manage it. And it is radiating from a carpenter from Nazareth on a hillside in Galilee. Stay with me. Because this is not a coincidence. This is not a nice parallel the theologians invented after the fact. This is a thread that was woven into the fabric of the story from the very first verse. And Jesus himself is the one who pulls it into the open. In John chapter 8, standing in the temple courts in Jerusalem, surrounded by Pharisees who want to arrest him, Jesus says 6 words that would have been instantly understood by every person in earshot. I am the light of the world. He does not say, I am like the sun. He does not say, I illuminate the way as a lamp illuminates a dark road. He says, I am the light. Present tense, unconditional, unqualified. He is not claiming to be a luminary. He is not claiming to be a maor, a bearer, a vessel, an instrument appointed to carry something greater than itself. He is claiming to be the or. He is claiming day one. Now go to the end of the Bible, not metaphorically, literally, the last 2 chapters of the last book, Revelation 21 and 22. The vision that the Apostle John received on a black volcanic island called Patmos, exiled there by the Roman Emperor Domitian, old and alone, and surrounded by water on every side. John had been one of the 3 on the mountain. He had been there when the light came through Jesus' face and clothing like a second sun, rising from inside a human body. He'd fallen on his face on that hillside in Galilee, and now, decades later, on a rock in the Aegean Sea, an angel shows him something. A city. Not a metaphor for a city. A city. With foundations and walls and gates and streets. A city so large its dimensions strain the imagination, descending out of heaven like a bride prepared for her husband. Brilliant as jasper, clear as crystal, gates made of single pearls. Streets of gold so pure it is transparent as glass. And then John says something that should make you set down whatever you are holding. And the city has no need of sun or moon to shine on it. No sun, no moon, no luminary, no maor. For the glory of God gives it light, and its lamp is the Lamb. Read that again slowly. The glory of God gives it light. Not the sun, not a star, not any object that was appointed on day 4 to govern the rhythm of light and darkness. The or of day 1, the light that existed before the sun, that burned in a thorn bush in Midian, that stood as a pillar of fire over 2 million frightened people in a desert, that radiated through the face and hands and robe of Jesus of Nazareth on a mountain in Galilee. That light fills the New Jerusalem, and its lamp, its maor, its luminary, the vessel that carries and focuses and makes it visible to human eyes, is the Lamb. Jesus is not the source of light in Revelation 21. He is the lamp, the bearer, the one through whom the glory of God shines into the city that will never need a sunset. The sun was always temporary. The sun was always an instrument. The sun was always a maor, appointed to govern a season of human history that would one day give way to something that needed no governing at all. And from the very first verse of Genesis, the text was telling you this. There is a woman in that city. You do not know her name yet, but you will. Her name is Mary, a teenage girl from a hill town in Galilee called Nazareth. A town so unremarkable that when a man named Nathanael first hears that the Messiah might come from there, his response is blunt. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? An angel comes to Mary in the middle of an ordinary day, and the angel tells her something that by every rational measure should be impossible, that she will carry a child, that the child will be called the Son of the Most High, that his kingdom will never end. And Mary, frightened, young, the whole weight of the impossible pressing down on her chest, says yes. She doesn't know about Revelation 21. She does not know about the pillar of fire in the wilderness, or the light in the tabernacle, or the hidden light the rabbis call, or haganuz. She does not know that the child she is carrying will one day stand on a mountain and shine like the sun from the inside out, or that centuries after that, an old man on a black volcanic island will see a city that needs no sun because her sun is its lamp. She knows one thing. God asked, and she answered, "Be it unto me according to your word." 6 words. The hinge of history. And 9 months later, in a stable in Bethlehem, the light of day 1 enters the world through a birth that smelled of hay and animals and the particular cold of a Judean winter night. Not radiating yet, not blinding, not announcing itself with thunder. Wrapped in cloth, lying in a feeding trough, making the small sounds that newborn human beings make. The maor, the first light, hidden in a baby. This is not a story about a Bible contradiction. This is not a story about cosmology or the sequence of creation days or what ancient Hebrew words mean, though all of those things matter. And we have walked through all of them together. This is a story about a light that was never explained by the sun, that existed before the sun, that will remain when the sun is no longer needed. A light that has been woven into every dark moment in the story of God and his people. The burning bush, the pillar of fire, the glory that filled the tabernacle, the face that blazed on the mountain, the city that will never need a sunrise because the one who rose from the dead is already there. The boy in the Sunday school class raised his hand and asked where the sun was on day 1. Here's the answer. The sun was not there yet, because the sun was never the point. The light was always the point, and the light has a name. So let's bring this home. We started with a question a child asked in a Sunday school classroom. A question that made the room go quiet. A question that Augustine wrestled with in the 4th century, and rabbis debated for generations before him. A question that skeptics have used for 2,000 years as evidence that Genesis cannot be trusted. And what we found when we slowed down, when we looked at the Hebrew, when we followed the thread across 66 books, was not a contradiction. We found a blueprint. 3 things I want you to take with you. The first is this. The Bible rewards slowness. Not laziness, not passivity. Slowness. The kind of reading that stops at a word and asks what it meant in the language it was first written in. The kind of reading that notices the sun doesn't have a name in Genesis 1 and asks why. The kind of reading that a 9-year-old does instinctively before anyone teaches him to skip past the hard parts and assume someone else has already figured it out. You have a Bible, you have access to tools that Augustine did not have, concordances, lexicons, commentaries, translations, 2,000 years of scholarship available on a device that fits in your pocket. The question is not whether the answers are there. The question is whether you are willing to slow down enough to find them. Every apparent contradiction in Scripture is an invitation, not a trap, not a stumbling block placed there by a careless author. An invitation to go deeper, to look closer, to discover that what looked like a crack in the foundation is actually a door into a room you have never been in before. The second thing is this. God has never needed the instruments he uses. The sun governs the light. But God created the light without the sun. The temple lamp burned in the tabernacle, but God's glory filled the room before the wick was lit. the angels announce the birth. But the birth would have happened without the announcement. God uses instruments. He appoints them. He honors them. He works through them consistently enough that we begin to confuse the instrument for the source. We do this with people. We do this with institutions. We do this with the particular church, the particular pastor, the particular season of life in which we first encountered God. And we begin slowly and without realizing it to treat the maor as though it were the or, the lamp as though it were the light. And then the lamp flickers. The pastor fails. The institution disappoints. The season ends. And we are shocked, as though the light itself had gone out. It has not gone out. It was never in the lamp to begin with. The source is not the instrument. The source has never needed the instrument. And the source, the or, the day one light, the glory that fills the New Jerusalem without a single sunrise, is not flickering, has never flickered, will not flicker. Not when your church disappoints you, not when your faith feels thin as paper, not when the darkness feels less like an absence and more like a presence pressing in from every side. The light was there before the sun. It will be there after the sun. And it is there now, in whatever room you are sitting in, reading this, carrying whatever it is you are carrying today. The third thing, and this is the one I want to leave with you. The light of day one did not stay at a distance. That is what makes the Bible different from every other ancient text about the gods. In Egypt, Ra drove his chariot across the sky, and you watched from below. In Babylon, Shamash dispensed justice from his throne, and you brought your offerings and hoped. The gods were luminaries, maorot, brilliant, distant, appointed to govern from far away. The God of Genesis does something none of those gods ever did. He wraps the light in skin. He takes the haganuz, the primordial, hidden, uncreated category light that existed before the sun that the rabbis said was too pure and too intense for this broken world. And he places it inside a human body, inside a baby in a feeding trough in Bethlehem, inside a carpenter walking dusty roads in Galilee, inside a man who gets tired and hungry and who wept at a tomb and who, on the night before he died, got down on his knees and washed the feet of the men who would abandon him before sunrise. The light of day one washed feet. Let that stay with you for a moment. And then it went to a cross, and the sky went dark. The sun itself, that great luminary appointed to govern the day, pulled its light back as though it could not bear to watch. 3 hours of darkness in the middle of the afternoon, the maor dimming in the presence of what was happening to the or. And then 3 days later, in a garden, in the early morning while it was still dark, the light came back. Not metaphorically. A man stood in a garden, and a woman named Mary Magdalene mistook him for the gardener until he said her name. And then she knew. And then the disciples knew. And then 500 people at once knew. And a man named Paul, who had been hunting Christians for sport, knew. And a young man named John, who would one day be exiled to a black volcanic island in the Aegean Sea, knew. The light that existed before the sun had gone into the darkest place in the universe, death itself, and come back out the other side. And it is still burning. If you have never given your life to that light, not to a religion, not to a tradition, not to a set of rules written in the margins of someone else's Bible, I want to invite you to do that today. Not because you have all the answers, not because the questions have stopped, but because the light is real and it is personal, and it spoke a woman's name in a garden and it knows yours too. If you are already walking in that light, if you have been for years, if faith is the oldest thing about you, then let this be a reminder. The sun will set tonight. It always does. But the light that was there before the sun rose for the last time 2,000 years ago on the outskirts of Jerusalem, and it has not stopped rising since. If this kind of deep scripture study speaks to you, subscribe. We do this every week. And if you have a question like the one we started with today, a Bible question that has always made you quietly wonder, that you were maybe a little afraid to ask out loud, leave it in the comments. The best questions always come from the people in the room who are brave enough to raise their hand. We will see you in the next one.